We the people want answers. We the people are sick of this shit. We the people are tired of the lies. We the people want answers. We the people are pissed off. We the people are pissed off.
My videos don't necessarily promote one religion. My views and opinions aren't meant to change the minds, opinions, or beliefs of others. Watch with an open mind. Copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976. Allowances made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, education, entertainment, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. All rights and credit go directly to its rightful owners. No copyright infringement is intended. We continue to uncover the profound wisdom within the timeless scriptures. Take care, and God bless.
Hey there, and welcome back to my channel. In this video, we're going to look at one of the most important documents in world history, the United States Constitution. So if you're ready to get them brain cow's milks, let's get to it. Okay, to get started, let's answer the super basic question. When was the Constitution written? Now, before we can answer that, we need to ask another basic question. What was the purpose of the Constitution? Well, essentially, it was written to fix the problems created by the previous governing document, the Articles of Confederation. If you want a review of that document, click right here, and I'll get you there faster than you can say. We hold these truths to be self-evident anyway. Under the Articles of Confederation, the central government was very weak and the states were very powerful. And if you watch my video on the Articles of Confederation, you know that this created all sorts of problems. So delegates met up in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787 in what became known as the Constitutional Convention in order to draft a new governing document. Now, there were 12 states represented at this convention, because Rhode Island refused to participate until the end when they threatened to boycott the new constitution if their concerns were not addressed. Anyway, it was during this convention, during the summer of 1787, that the Constitution was written. But once it was written, when did the states begin debating it? Well, let's take a look at that right now. Okay, so let me introduce you to the next big question we're going to answer today. When was the Constitution ratified? Well, in order to answer that question, we're going to have to look at a few different things. So let's get to it. So once the Constitution was written, it had to be sent to the states for ratification. For those of you who don't know what ratification means, it simply means approval. And in order for the Constitution to become the supreme law of the land, 9 of the 13 states would have to approve it. But once it was sent off, how did the states respond? Well, some of them, like Delaware, immediately ratified the Constitution. But others took a bit more convincing. Those who were in favor of the Constitution were called Federalists, and those who opposed it were called Anti-Federalists. Now, there's a lot to say about both of these groups and their positions. But since we're just looking at the ratification of the Constitution in this video, I'm only going to highlight the points that are essential to our understanding of the ratification process. So let's do that. First of all, there were 2 main reasons why Anti-Federalists opposed the Constitution. First, they feared that the national government would become too powerful and therefore a threat to the liberty of the people. After all, the Anti-Federalists were the same folks who had fought for independence from Great Britain, and they didn't want to simply transfer that power from one king on a faraway island to a collection of unelected bureaucrats in a faraway capital city. Secondly, Anti-Federalists were concerned that the Constitution made no mention of individual rights, and that left them vulnerable to the whims of the national government. They wanted specific protections for individual rights in the Constitution itself before they would ratify it. Well, Federalists like James Madison argued that such a list of rights was not necessary, because the national government didn't have the power to infringe upon those rights in the first place. Remember what we learned about the Articles of Confederation. The central government was very weak and didn't have the power to tax or regulate commerce or raise an army. So Madison and other Federalists argued that if the central government didn't have any power, then what was the fear? Why would anyone be afraid of a government that could uneven make them build roads or pay taxes or defend them from Native Americans? Furthermore, Madison pointed out that the state governments still had all of that power and could easily protect the people from any tyrannical central government. Well, despite those arguments, many states did call for amendments specifically addressing individual rights. And again, while we'll talk about those amendments in another video, it is important to note here that James Madison promised that a Bill of Rights would be added to the Constitution after ratification. Now, that promise helped to convince the state of Virginia to ratify the Constitution. Without that concession, it is unlikely that Virginia would have ratified. And remember, James Madison was from Virginia, and several other important people like George Washington and John Marshall were also from that state. And if Virginia hadn't ratified, it would have reflected poorly on the men who helped write the Constitution. Anyway, with Virginia on board, New York soon followed, though they insisted upon submitting proposed amendments. To states, Rhode Island and North Carolina refused to ratify until a Bill of Rights was added to the Constitution. And we'll talk about that in a future video. So let's go ahead and answer the question we posed at the beginning of this video. When was the Constitution ratified? Well, it was sent to the states in September of 1787, and 9 states ratified it by June of 1788, though again, Rhode Island and North Carolina refused to ratify until June of 1789, when the Bill of Rights was added. Now, before we finish, let's take a look at the principles embedded in the Constitution. Okay, so what are some of the principles found in the Constitution? Well, first, there's the principle of checks and balances, which ensures that no one branch of government becomes too powerful. Second, there's the principle of individual rights, which posits that people possess rights that government cannot take away. Third, there's the principle of liberty, which underscores the idea that people are free to make choices regarding their own lives. Fourth, there's the principle of limited government, which asserts that the power of government is restricted by the rule of law, and that government can only do what the people allow it to do. Fifth, there's the principle of natural rights theory, which argues that people are born with certain unalienable rights that all just governments must protect. And sixth, there's the principle of republican government, which describes a system in which elected representatives make laws on behalf of the people. And finally, there's the principle of popular sovereignty, which argues that the power to govern is ultimately in the hands of the people. Now, before we go, let's look at the antecedent documents that influenced the framers as they wrote the Constitution. In other words, what inspired them to create this new form of government? Well, the writings of European philosophers about natural rights theory and various forms of government certainly played a role. Think John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, and Baron de Montesquieu. But American colonists were also inspired by the English documents establishing various liberties. I mean, remember, they were fighting for independence from Great Britain, so they knew firsthand the abuses of power that could happen under a monarchy, and they were familiar with English documents that established limits on that power, so they drew inspiration from those documents as well. I'm talking specifically about the Magna Carta and the English Bill of Rights. However, James Madison pointed out one crucial difference between those documents and the Constitution. He said, "In Europe, charters of liberty have been granted by power. America has set the example of charters of power granted by liberty." In other words, while other nations had adopted constitutional government because a monarch had given them the right to have it, the United States adopted the Constitution because the people had a right to create a government, and that power could not be taken away from them. Okay, that's what you need to know about the Constitution. Until next time, I'm out.
Thank you all.